Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to be painting this jungle scene. I kind of treated this as a doodle, not much thought went into it, and in fact if I knew it was going to look like this, I would have actually approached it a bit differently, but I just knew I wanted to paint tropical leaves and I want to approach it like the layered reef painting I did before. By the way, if you haven't seen it, it's also on my channel. But let's start this by masking off the sides. I just use washi tape and then I'm going to show you the colors I use. By the way, sometimes when you're painting on a double page spread, the book tries to close up, so I always secure the sides with some extra clips. Okay, so next let's go over the colors. This one is running out, but it's Hansa Yellow Medium by Daniel Smith, Aquarius Green by Roman Szmal, Yellow Ochre by Holbein, and Indigo by Schminckea. Let's start to paint. I'm going to take my large flat brush and I'm going to mix Hansa Yellow Medium with Yellow Ochre and the tiniest bit of Aquarius Green. I'm going to use a very thin consistency, which means I just have a lot of water compared to paint, and I'm going to lightly cover the top part, then dragging it further down to the bottom. I've had people ask me how to not get paint in between my paper when I'm painting on a double page spread, and this is how I basically do it. I just try to be careful when I'm painting in between instead of just painting it over so the paint doesn't puddle in the middle. You can see that from the reef painting I have some blue, that's because I didn't do this, but you just have to be a little bit more careful when you're placing the paint, and that's it. Once my paper is slightly dampened without any puddles, I'm going to paint some misty hills or mountains. I just slowly added some Aquarius Green bit by bit as I get closer to the foreground. And I try to paint it section by section, then softening the bottom of each hill or mountain with a clean brush so it looks kind of misty. As I mentioned earlier, I went into this without a plan, so I didn't really know what the background should look like. I just felt like painting these hills, but it's actually not necessary because most of this will be covered anyway. So if you don't want to start here, you can actually skip this step and instead paint an abstract wet on wet with the yellow color being in the middle, and the corners as well as the bottom will be darker by adding more green. So you can skip this step, but I had fun painting this part, so I kind of just kept going. It's like having a secret painting session underneath what will be painted over. As I said in the beginning, I kind of treated this as a doodle, so I just painted what felt natural and what I felt like making without much direction in my head. But going back to what I'm doing now, if you want to follow my process, I just added more green as I get closer to the foreground so it looks darker. And as I get even closer to the front, sometimes I like to add little bits of indigo as well. When I'm painting this, I try to still paint in a light to medium consistency because I'm still going to be layering so much more on top of this. And with each layer, I'm generally going to use a darker value and a thicker consistency. So I don't want to overwork it at this point. If you feel like any parts of the painting is too wet and you can't add more paint because of it, I would just quickly dry it off with a hairdryer. Once I'm done with the last hill, I didn't really know how to approach the foreground, but I knew I didn't want to paint a flat hill in front, so instead I started painting some leaves. Here I'm just going to use the same green mixtures. It doesn't really matter what ratio you use, but I'm starting to thicken the consistency a little bit. I'm just freehanding these leaves, which will bunch in the middle as a tree. These are banana leaves. If you want, you can look up some inspiration of tropical leaves on the internet and have it in front of you so you can mix and match different types in your painting. After painting these leaves, I realized that there's too much contrast between the leaves and the white of the paper, so I'm just going to cover it really quickly with my large flat brush, just doing a light wash with a dark green. I'm just going to dry it off really quickly before adding on the other plants. For this, I'm painting in a medium consistency, but I like to play with the ratio of color mixtures, so some can be a bit more yellow, whereas others may be a bit more bluish green, and I just try to keep adding more and more leaves and plants. One of my easy go-to tropical leaves to paint are palm trees or palm leaves. They're just so fun since you only need to paint the middle and then you can paint the single leaves growing out of the main stem in one stroke. And I'm just going to paint a couple of these. You can see that I'm starting to play with the height and placement of these leaves, starting to darken the corners of my page, but I'm still fairly careful with the consistency because I'm still somewhat treating this as a background. It's not the darkest layer yet. I'm just going to randomly add more little by little. I even added some gigantic trees growing out of the hill, which doesn't make sense scale-wise, but I still added them anyway. I think this was just an excuse for me to darken those parts of the background. I don't know why when I was painting it made sense to me, but as I'm voiceovering and looking back, it doesn't make sense at all. So if you have any other ideas to fill the background, it's probably better to go with it. Personally, now I think I would have just painted over to darken the background because these textures will end up making it look too busy as well. Don't be scared to paint some trees which grows out of frame. I find that this brings a nice interest, but I want to still keep the center empty so your eyes will still have a bit of space to break the fullness of the composition later. I'm also going to add some viney leaves. I find that this is so fun to paint and it brings a lot of that chaotic jungle feel to the composition. I'm also going to add some near the center, and for those areas I want it to be lighter, so I added more yellow ochre. Personally though, I would have used a slightly thicker consistency because this ended up drying too light. I guess the tree still made sense to me at this point because I decided to paint some more. For this one though, I just focused more on the bushy texture, and I'm also going to paint more trees closer to us so we can actually see the leaves. When I was painting this, I realized I should have used a more greenish or bluish green because the yellow green didn't show up as well, especially because the background is also darker than this color. You can see when I'm painting on top of the areas which are lighter, this color looks fine, but as I get towards the bottom where the hills are darker, it doesn't show up that well. So just be mindful of this if you're going to paint along. I find that the center is the hardest area to figure out what to paint because when I'm thinking of a jungle scene, I'm usually imagining a more vertical composition, whereas this is very long landscape. So I was really trying to figure out what to place at the center. But anyway, at this point, I feel like there's already a lot going on for the center of the page. So now I'm going to start moving to the foreground closer to us. So the leaves are going to be much larger at this point. I'm using a slightly darker value, but I'm not using my thickest consistency yet. After painting some of these larger leaves, I felt like the bottom looked a little bit too light, so I decided to go over it with more indigo in the mixture so it is of a darker value even though I'm using a fairly light consistency. And since I've already painted a lot of leaves, I'm going to try to paint around them as best as I can, but I'm not too worried about the neatness since I know I'm going to be painting over this anyway with the darkest value. After adding on these small leaves, I felt like there's a lot going on already and it's actually quite chaotic, so I'm going to bring this together by adding the dark values in the foreground. I'm using a fairly thick consistency here. As you can see, the color is quite dark, so these tree trunks look like it's closer compared to the one I painted on the right hand side. On the right here, I'm going to paint more palm leaves, but I'm using quite a thick consistency here with a lot of indigo as well, so the color looks like a very deep and dark green. In front here, I'm going to paint some giant ferns. I started out with the stems and I also used my dagger brush to paint the smaller stems so I can visualize the placement of the leaves. And to paint the leaves on either side of the stems, it's going to be fairly long. I just did this zigzagging motion until I reached the main stem. I feel like after these ferns, I need to paint something in between it and increase the height to hide those crazy trees at the background. So I decided to just extend a long stem where I can paint leaves around it. I want to cover as much of the foreground as possible, and here I'm using a medium consistency, but there's a lot of indigo in this mix, so it's still quite dark, and I'm just going to fill in this large space by painting long leaves which are going to fan out. On the right, I quite like the leaves that I've already painted, so I'm just going to go over it again to darken it and redefine some of them. I'm using a thick consistency here, as you can see, and I'm only going to do this for some of them. You can see for others, I've just kind of painted over them, so it looks like it's the same tree or the same plant, but some leaves are closer to us, whereas others are overlapped in the background. I'm going to do the same for these leaves growing out of the tree trunk. It will still look attached, but it will just help with the depth. By the way, these might look a bit weird, but in Indonesia, I see a lot of these parasite plants growing from tree trunks. They kind of look like this from my head, but it's probably not accurate, but I feel like these plants are really fun and helps with the height of the composition since you can place them at any height you want wherever you find tree trunks. And I'm also going to add some vines for extra texture. I'm also going to add vines at the top, imagining there are some taller branches out of the frame. These are so fun to add. These are probably my favorites. They look like nature's tinsels, and I just made some of the lines slightly textured by giving my brush a little wiggle following those curved lines. After the tree branch is completely dry on the left and you can see that it's not as dark anymore, I'm going to use an even thicker consistency to paint more leaf textures. I'm adding some palm leaves here just like on the right hand side. I still have a bit of space on the left under the tree branch, and I'm just going to add more of those ferns. I feel like there's still space next to the fern, so I'm going to add the fanning leaves, but they're going to grow out of a stem, and I'm just going to paint a few of these bunches. Lastly, I'm going to add some extra vines hanging from the top, and I'm using my dagger brush here for some added thin, delicate lines. And that's basically it. As you can see, you can't really see the painted hills in the background anymore, and it's a little bit chaotic, but I really enjoy the process of painting whatever I feel like. It was very relaxing to me, and I hope you enjoy painting along to this one as well. Once I'm done, I'm going to unmask the sides to reveal the painting. If you decide to give this a go, which approach would you pick? The more abstract but neat approach, or would you treat it the same chaotic way that I did? Personally, I actually don't mind the messy chaos because that's how I kind of picture a rainforest or a jungle in my head anyway. But yeah, let me know in the comments. Like usual, the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in the description box. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Bye!